Thank you so much, William, for that lovely introduction, and to all of you for the true honor of having me back again this year. I feel a true sense of purpose and growing passion in being able to share my knowledge around mental health, especially with your industry. I am so incredibly thrilled to continue the conversation around healing a system that gravely needs our attention and care. And I'd like to start us off today with one of the most powerful forms of healing, storytelling. I believe in the power of film, especially documentaries, to help mirror back cracks in our own foundations and create a sense of empathy in our human experience. Every one of us, every single one of us has a story to tell. And today, many of the stories you will hear will not look that different than the ones you've experienced in your own profession. And it's about time you got a voice. So without further ado, here are some highlights from the film First Wave, directed by Matt Heineman.
Every day, we look death right in its eye. And the scary part is it looks right back at you. It's a storm that nobody's ever been in before. There's no playbook for this. There are no directions.
I'm curious how you guys are feeling.
Well, we're all pretty new to LIJ, and they sent us to the floors to help out at first. And then we started doing the iPads. I don't want to get emotional because it's actually been hard, because to see the families upset.
When you're the only one there, while their family's on video chat and they're crying because they can't hold their hands, you're trying your best to accommodate for them not being able to be there, and you become their family member. And I feel like it's like I'm losing my family members through the phone. So that builds up with you.
He was the only one. I kept looking at him, and every time I look at him, I see those little kids, and I needed him to do well. He said, "I'm so young, and I have a young family. Please don't let me die." He's two little kids like I do. And so I just wanted to see him do well. I don't know. Every day we go home and I think about how I might be bringing this home to my own husband and how that could have been him. And so I just wanted to see him do well.
So you guys are calling it?
What time is it?
7:03.
This one? Okay.
Oh my God.
Can you just have a quick moment of silence before everyone leaves?
Oh, this is so. I saw him this morning.
That's what everyone says. They were fine this morning.
We just, because he saw me, he's like, "What are you doing?" He was,
It's crazy.
I'm sorry to tell you this, but we've tried multiple rounds of CPR, and we were unable to bring him back. It's just been a long day. long.
It's just, you hear it in their voices, but you have no sense of reassurance for these people. I can't give that to them. Like, it's just, I'm so used to saying, oh, this is what tends to happen. But every moment it's like, you don't know, you thought they were fine. You call their daughter like, oh, he's relatively stable, and then you get a call like, oh, like, he's dead. It's like you're always on edge. You can never have a sigh of relief. And if I feel like this, you just think of the family. You can't see them. You can't hear them. Like, half of these people, we don't even have phone chargers. There's not even, all these people, they have their phones dead. No one has a phone charger for them. If you try, people don't want to get cross-contaminated. You're so isolated. I'm sorry, I'm supposed to curse, I'm sorry. But it's just like, what am I supposed to do? So it's just like, you just feel so helpless. And like, it's so nice, yes, people say, thank you, you're saving lives. Before I felt like I was saving lives. Before you felt like, okay, this person had a heart attack, you give them the medicine, there's a good shot for them. But here, it's like you got nothing. You just hope and pray it doesn't happen to you. Every day, it's like, it's so ridiculous. It's just every day. I'm sorry, it's every day.
This is a character test for us individually. It's a character test for us collectively as a society. What did you do at that moment when all around you lost their head?
That was some powerful stuff. And I'm sure a lot may be coming up for you right now. So I would like to invite us to use one of the tools we'll discuss today, mindfulness. So let's all take a moment to connect what's coming up for us. I'm going to invite you all to close your eyes. Just take a couple deep breaths, kind of letting the day fall away from you. Just moving inside. Just notice. Notice what's coming up for you. Notice how your body is feeling as you process these images you just watched. Did anything resonate? Did you see yourself in some of these situations? Do you think of a friend or a colleague? Just allow the feelings to be there and the thoughts, and just notice. Notice how you feel knowing that so many in your industry have faced or are facing these challenges. What thoughts come up around that? Any physical sensations? Just notice and be with them. I just want you to take a moment to ask yourself what you need in order to keep going as we address these issues. What may be a helpful thought that you can use right now to help you continue? Or maybe it's just some deep breaths. Just ask yourself what you need. I want us all to take another deep breath. Inhale. Exhale. And open your eyes and come back to the room. What you have been through as a community has been difficult, and for some, horrific, terrifying, and traumatic. Yet many of you in this room have had to normalize these realities in order to cope. For 2 years, healthcare workers have been forced to keep it moving, alongside with the weight of a heavy emotional burden, all with no end in sight. In a culture where the paradigm is to say, I'm fine, I am here as a mental health coach in order to challenge that notion. This industry is not fine. In fact, it's in trouble. I would even dare say, in critical condition. So my aim here today is to spread awareness about current mental health challenges in mental health care and put a spotlight on the mental health issues that might be behind some of these shifts. I'd like to educate you on the potential threats to your own well-being and what you may be able to do about them. Inspire you to demand support before it's too late. Support you in creating a practice of self-care tools that can expand your well-being and leave you with hope, of course, for a brighter future. But first, let's look at the realities. 500,000 and counting healthcare workers have left the industry since 2020, in 2 years. That's over 500,000. And 500,000 of brilliant, talented, hardworking, incredibly caring people who are passionate about their jobs. But this is not a new problem. In fact, in 2018, prior to the pandemic, 48% of clinicians were planning to leave their careers due to the overwhelm at 80%, burnout at 78%, and pessimism of the future of healthcare. In fact, 49% said they would not recommend medicine as a career to their own children. It gets even worse. In 2022, a new study was released that 75% of healthcare workers are predicted to leave the healthcare industry by 2025. That's 3 years. So what's leading to all of this? Well, for years, you've had to be on call and leave events, even personal ones like anniversaries or birthdays, to travel unexpectedly or take phone calls. You've been woken up in the middle of the night and lost sleep due to crises. You've had to perform with that lack of sleep. There's been staffing shortages, travel plans changing because of on-call duties, and continually being exposed to trauma, maybe the loss of a young patient or their families. Now, COVID is just the added bonus of ambiguity. And you are human beings after all. And we have more problems that have crept up, including ongoing trauma, complex trauma that's developed into PTSD, moral injury, vaccine mandates that are creating a very, very strong divide, staff shorting, burnout, compassion fatigue, putting your loved ones at risk and yourselves, and much, much more. Just like this image, it's like trying to hold a rock up a hill. It's just not sustainable. So today I want to put a couple of these issues in the spotlight. First being moral injury, which is a new problem that we found coming up around COVID. Vaccines that have been creating mistrust and sometimes apathy, and unresolved trauma and what that does if not faced. So today, as we seek to understand these problems, I want to talk about an important coping tool that I use in coaching all the time, which is called acceptance. It's been very powerful in getting many of my clients through COVID, but in a very different industry than your own. Acceptance, it's really important to point out, is not just simply accepting your fate. It is actually the step that leads to action and resilience. To drive this home, I'd like to use an analogy of a house fire. If you were to come home one day and there was a house fire inside of your home, you could simply stare at the house fire and live in denial of that house fire, and it would grow into a much bigger problem. Or you could accept the fact that there's a house fire, make sure that all of your family, loved ones, and pets are safe outside, call 911, and then the resourcefulness begins. Many of you in this room know about resilience. In fact, many of you have seen things that people would never have to witness in a lifetime. Yet you've dedicated your lives to this profession, where many times resilience is what got you through. So acceptance is how we get back to our resourcefulness and our ability to cope, which all of you still have, even if it's been a really big burden. It's important to remember that acceptance is our fuel that helps us keep going. So let's dive in. What is moral injury? Moral injury was a idea coined by the writings of Vietnam War veteran peace activist Camilo Mac Bica, who talked a lot about the moral decisions that many of the soldiers had to go through during Vietnam. We're seeing a lot of comparisons to healthcare workers and their decision making that they've had to endure during COVID. And usually they are very quick, split-second decisions that people have a really hard time getting over. For healthcare workers during the pandemic, this included rationing care and personal protective equipment, watching patients die, and not allowing families to visit dying relatives. All very painful split-second decisions they could not shake. The definition is the damage done to one's conscience or moral compass when that person perpetrates, witnesses, or fails to prevent acts that transgress one's own moral beliefs, values, or ethical code of conduct. It also can be said that it's a disruption in one's individual confidence and expectations of one's own or others' motivations or capacity to believe in a just and ethical manner. It can also really create distrust in systems that are forcing you to make these decisions. I often think of a story of a man that I met taking a drive through Tennessee. He was my driver and he had a Vietnam War cap on. And so I sort of leaned in and got curious about his experience. And he told me of a very painful decision he had to make during the war. There was a 5-year-old little girl holding a grenade and his entire platoon behind him. And he had a decision to either shoot this little girl or lose his entire platoon behind him. He shot the little girl, and as he describes, he died that day. Right now, he just feels like he is existing. Many people, despite their circumstances or how unequipped they are, live with this feeling inside that it should have been different. Many people don't know where to turn to, often ashamed or feeling guilty about their decision or being forced to make that decision. Sometimes it's hard to talk to a spouse who has nothing to do with the industry or a friend who just may simply not understand. So oftentimes it goes untreated, untalked about, and it is just a burden that somebody is carrying around. There are some dire consequences of moral injury if left untreated. Moral injury can take the life of those suffering from it, metaphorically and literally. It does leave one feeling powerless with no one left to turn to. Oftentimes, beyond the normal support system, people don't even feel comfortable going to a therapist or a coach to talk. They just simply feel that no one will understand. It can lead to serious emotional distress, depression, and suicide if left untreated. Moral injury debilitates people, and it prevents them simply from living normal and healthy lives. And then we have trauma. You all know what trauma is. Many of you have seen it in various forms throughout your career. You may have seen it secondarily, but you've been surrounded in it your entire lives. But there are special cases where you truly cannot shake. It could be a young parent that loses a baby. It could be a man that you talked to that just was so kind and sweet. To simply put it, trauma is a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. But others have defined it like this. It's nightmares that get scarred into your mind, body, and soul. It's something that can hide in us and suddenly appear just long enough to mess us up. Something that changes the footprint of your life. Something painful, devastating, disappointing that changes you forever and requires a process to get through. A catastrophic event that hijacks your brain or a deep imprint on your soul. Many during COVID have experienced complex trauma, or it's morphing into post-traumatic stress disorder. Complex trauma is something that happens repeatedly, often results in direct harm to the individual. The effects of complex trauma are cumulative, and the experience frequently transpires within a particular time frame or within a specific relationship, but often in a specific setting. COVID is no exception. Post-traumatic stress disorder we're learning a lot about. It's been talked about. There's been warnings out there, and after time, this unresolved trauma can lead to a very, very persistent or frightening thoughts or memories of the ordeal, and it very much needs to be treated. Here's why. Trauma is personal. It doesn't disappear if it is not validated. When it is ignored or invalidated, the silent screams continue internally, heard only by one held captive. When someone enters the pain and hears the screams, only then can healing begin. That's what Daniel Burnout wrote, and so many believe, that we can't simply put it aside, ignore it, or suppress it. We can sense it, even if we're not dealing with it. Just because someone who suffered trauma blocks it out unconsciously or consciously, it doesn't matter or doesn't mean that he or she won't feel the effects from it. And sometimes it can take months or years to show up, and it shows up rather unexpectedly. Here's why. Emotions matter. Emotions are wonderful things. They keep us connected to ourselves and our resourcefulness. But they need to be processed, heard, validated, and understood. They do not go anywhere, and they are very demanding and stubborn. Here's why. They always have something very useful and powerful to say about what you're currently experiencing. What they do is they beg you to come home and listen to what you're trying to tell you. And they're very helpful if understood. For example, stress. It's usually begging the question, isn't there a better way to do this? By answering that question, we usually find a new plan of action. But we have to listen, and we have to listen hard. To use another analogy, it's like a best friend showing up at our door. What would we do if this friend was hurting, in trouble, needing support? Of course, we would invite them in. We'd sit them down. We'd allow them to be wherever they are. We'd allow them to process, be heard, and we wouldn't leave them until they felt better. This is the thing. We have to give ourselves that same kind, friendly gesture. Now, I want you to imagine that a friend shows up at your door and she has made a decision freshly after a big fight with her husband to get a divorce. But you're busy. You have something really important to tend to. Maybe your child is having a conniption fit and you have to get them to bed. So you tell your friend, can we talk later? And then you don't talk to them for 2 years. What do you think would happen to that friendship? We are neglecting ourselves in the same way. It's really important to pay close attention to your feelings and give them the same attention you would a good friend. Because avoidance creates disconnection. To drive this home a little further, what would happen if we had made some promises to our partner? We'd pick up the kids, we'd wash the dishes, we'd take out the garbage, and we just didn't follow through. We avoided those activities. What would start to happen in that relationship? Or if your boss emailed you needing some important information and you didn't get back to him for a month, we'd start to feel pretty disconnected from these things, and lots of other problems would ensue. Avoidance not only causes disconnections with ourselves, but it can cause disconnection with others as well. Because what we're doing is we're cutting ourselves off from our own resourcefulness and our ability to get through. And always greater problems the longer you avoid. So what does avoidance do over time? Well, the trauma, it has side effects. And some of these can be very deadly. While we might think we're fine, I want you to listen to some of the after effects of trauma. They can result in anxiety or panic attacks in seemingly normal situations, flashbacks, nightmares, and body memories regarding the traumatic event, addiction and eating disorders in an attempt to escape or numb negative emotions. We've seen addiction just really expand during COVID. And when you've had a hard day, a glass of wine feels really nice. But when that becomes a daily habit, it's not necessarily taking care of the pain. Sleeping issues, including trouble going to sleep or staying asleep. Suffering from feelings of detachment or feeling dead inside. Disassociation is a real disconnect in situations and conversations. Hypervigilant, just a constant feeling of feeling on guard or like something really bad's going to happen, and that anticipatory anxiety. Uncontrollable anger and acting on it. And it doesn't have to be at the hospital. It can be with a toddler that's just running rampantly. And all of a sudden you're angry in a way that you never expected. Not being able to tolerate conflicts as you once would have. Just simple things just drive you to the edge. And unexplained or irrational fears of people, places, of things. A feeling of shame. An innate feeling you're bad, worthless, or without importance in this world. Many suffer from chronic or ongoing depression. And then there's the avoidance of people, places, or things that may be related to the event. How do you do that when you have to go to the hospital every day? It's like your fight or flight responses are saying don't go, but then you have to go. I've talked to a lot of healthcare workers who have to sit in their car and meditate or listen to music on the way to work, or they just have to cry and shed the whole way home. And then we get into the vaccine debate. It's not enough to experience trauma, but what about the vaccines? Either way, it doesn't matter what side you're on, there's a feeling of betrayal and unsafety, which only compounds the feelings of trauma and mistrust in others. The worst is people only openly expressing their mistrust in medical and scientific community, as well as the public, saying, after everything we've done for them, how am I being let go? Or after everything I've done for them, why haven't they gotten vaccinated? Why are they filling this bed right now? Many workers have gone from heroes to being the bad guy. There's violence, there's screaming, there's name calling, and it's just getting worse. Now, let's talk about changing the culture. How do we do that? Well, in order to restore trust from employees, mental health programs must be put into place to ensure workers feel safe, cared for, and change for that is on the horizon. We must act now, otherwise we will continue to lose brilliant, talented workers with years of experience and expertise that can keep our society alive. This is some serious stuff, but there's hope. In March of this year, Biden signed the Dr. Lorna Breen Healthcare Provider Protection Act. Dr. Breen was a doctor who committed suicide in 2020. She was feeling very overwhelmed and felt like she had nowhere to turn to, like most people. The stigma, the fear of losing her licensure, just became too much to bear. But fortunately, her life did not go in vain. Her family fought very hard to create this act, and now it is a law. And what it does is it aims to reduce and prevent suicide, burnout, and mental and behavioral health conditions among healthcare professionals. Healthcare professionals have long experienced high levels of stress and burnout, as you know, and COVID-19 has only exacerbated the problem. So what the act does is it establishes grants and requires other activities to improve mental and behavioral health among healthcare providers. What we're looking to do is create a new normal that people can feel comfortable seeking out, and that hospitals are providing these programs so there's no more stigma. We're removing the barriers, and you are going to see quite a lot of changes happening. And we're going to cultivate a plan that identifies strategies to promote resiliency. And there is hope, but we must act now. Right now, there are many suffering, and this is going to take time. So I really encourage you, if you or you know somebody who is suffering, to get in and get some help. And I'm happy to say it's finally time for us to close the chapter on the I am fine culture. What we have to do now is spread awareness with your colleagues about the new laws, because knowledge is power. The more people that know about this, the more demands that there will be. Encourage your organization to do something. Hire a chief well-being officer to oversee mental health programs. And hire a therapist or coach and encourage others to do the same. Like I said, if you're suffering right now, there is no need for it. Get in there and get some help. We're ready for you. And maybe we can change the paradigm from I'm fine to I may not be fine today, but together you will be in the future.
I could be losing a loved one that same day. I'm talking to you, telling you that you're losing a loved one.
We have the potential to lose an entire generation of healthcare workers. And I think we'll continue to see the long tail of trauma that's apparent, trauma that's deeply buried inside of us, trauma that we want to acknowledge, trauma that we don't want to acknowledge.
We kind of have to just keep going, even though we're struggling mentally with a lot of the things that we've gone through in the past. And it's kind of hard to like get over trauma when you're like day to day still in the trenches.
It's very easy when we get through these things to say, okay, we're all better now. And the people who actually were the most vulnerable and or putting their lives on the line, we just sort of assume that they're okay too.
There's absolutely no question that they've all been changed forever. We've all been changed forever. But what they went through, what they saw, the magnitude of the death that they witnessed day in, day out, especially in New York, especially during the first wave.
We go to work and some of us suffer from depression. We go to work and some of us have anxiety that we're going through. the focus doesn't necessarily have to be redirected per se, but can we just get a wider lens? Can we get a bigger picture?
During this pandemic, it's not just a job. It's our passion, and this is like our service.
We struggle too. We really do have to amplify the voices of healthcare workers because we're not the majority. And a lot of us have left the field. Right to the CEOs, the CMOs, right to how can we make this hospital better by investing in the human workforce. That's doable. It's not asking much. But those are the steps to make ultimate culture change, because it needs to be a culture change, not just a policy too.
These healthcare workers put their lives on the line, but they ultimately are human. They're fragile, they break too. What makes them heroes is that they keep going. They get back up and do it again. And I think it's easy to forget about what they've gone through in all of this.
I just love what she said about being human, that you all are human too. I know you've heard heroes quite a lot, but how much have you heard human? To bring this home, I'd like to read a quote by Mr. Rogers, one of my favorites growing up. And he said, anything that's human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can be more manageable. And when we can talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. The people we trust with that important talk can help us know that we are not alone. So, change begins with you. And as I said, I'm going to bring some hopefulness to the end of this presentation by giving and sharing some tools that might be helpful to you, or just some things to think about as you start to acknowledge your own feelings and where you're at in all of this. So I would like to start with mindfulness. Mindfulness is about the power of now. Many of you have heard of it, but maybe some of you are wondering exactly what it is. So it's how we get back home to ourselves, because it's in the moment, that's where everything is okay. I actually have a friend, a very dear friend that's a healthcare worker, and he suffers from anxiety. Maybe many people in his field don't know it, but he often calls me for advice. And so we talk through, and I asked him what brings him back to the moment. And he talked about his surgeries. He said when he was in surgery and he's waiting for a lung to expand, he feels like time stands still. And I thought about that for many weeks after. The fact that we get another breath is just miraculous, isn't it? In the time I've just been talking, I got 3 little miracles. So it's really important to take stock, just drop into the moment where everything is okay as long as we're with ourselves. So to define mindfulness, it's the quality or state of being conscious or aware of something. It's sort of an awareness, like how am I feeling? Just like we did in the beginning, what do I resonate with? How do I feel? What are my thoughts? What am I feeling in my body? It's also a mental state achieved by focusing one's awareness on the present moment, while calmly acknowledging and accepting those feelings, thoughts, and bodily sensations just as they are. So we're combining that wonderful power tool of acceptance, saying it's okay, you're just here and you're just having a moment. There's something really powerful about that, because remember, emotions need to be validated. And the minute you validate them, they're okay and they pass. I love this quote, and it's written by Van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Knows the Score. It's a wonderful book that I highly recommend about trauma and where it shows up in the body and how we can start to connect to trauma in our body. But he wrote that mindfulness not only makes it possible to survey our internal landscape with compassion and curiosity, but also actively steer us in the right direction for self-care. And we have found a lot of benefit in doing so, including increased emotional regulation. So those really angry moments start to calm down a little bit. We have decreased depression, better memory, cognitive improvements, stronger relationships, better physical health, less emotional reactivity, deeper sleep, and better quality of life, just to name a few. In other words, just be here now. I think there's something really comforting to the self when we just acknowledge. And we're sort of born that way. I love babies because they just allow themselves to be wherever they're at. If they want to act silly, if they want to cry, if they're sad, if they're hungry, if they need to burp, whatever needs to happen, they just allow it to happen. There is something inside of us that says that's okay. It's sort of the adulting that starts to create these judgments about where we're at. So I say return to that innocence. And that's what mindfulness helps us do in returning to the moment. It's important to also note that you are a human being, not a human doing. So many times we can just get so caught up in the next thing, keep it moving culture that we forget just to be. And many people, when they get into coaching and they want to look for tools and they think of mindfulness, they think they have to sort of sit somewhere stoically with their backs erect in a very uncomfortable position. And many of my clients say, I don't want to sit and think about all those thoughts in my head because they are already driving me crazy, even when I try and distract myself from them. So it's really important that we just spend time being. That's what I talk to clients about. And I just love that. I mean, it could be in anything. It could be when you're driving or listening to a song. Just experience your humanness and the feeling of being. That's enough. That's mindfulness. It's also really important that we notice which time zone we're living in. One of the things we know about anxiety is that it lives either in the future or the past. It does not live here, right now. The mind doesn't like suffering. It doesn't like ambiguity. And so what it's trying to do is protect us from that. And it's a lot of times thinking about what could go wrong based on our past experiences, and it's on a superhighway between those two. The fastest track off of anxiety is to connect to the moment. It's also really important that we notice our thoughts, that we allow them, that we accept them with self-compassion. I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase, what we resist persists, but those unhelpful thoughts will just keep hanging around and send us in a loop, especially when we're in anxiety with no resolution. So the more we notice those unhelpful thoughts, we can also invite them to be rewritten. For example, what would help me today instead of something bad is going to happen? Or what would I do if that bad thing happened? That's a really fast track to stop it dead in its tracks, is to say, what would I do? And remember that there are solutions. If you really look back on your life, in the past, you've always made it through. You're here, you're now, you're living, you're breathing. You've always been able to do this. But anxiety minimizes our ability to get through things. So it's really important that we watch our thoughts, because thoughts become things and things become actions. And so just watching them and trying to rewrite them, again, all through the lens of self-compassion. It's also very important, you probably know better than anyone, but to take really good care of your body. Make sure that you're eating well, that you're not just grabbing those chips. Drink lots of water, stay hydrated, get exercise. Find activities that fill you up. I always tell clients, follow that good feeling. So if something lifts you up, whether it's bicycling, that's one of my favorites, I feel like a 5-year-old again, or it's dancing, which is another thing I love to do. Whatever it is, get in your body and move. Get connected to your body. And also listen to your body. Your body is a messenger, and it's important that we notice what it's trying to tell us. So if you're getting that really stiff neck, close your eyes. Just ask your body, what's it trying to tell you? Where does this come from? What is literally a pain in your neck right now? Because once you start approaching your body with curiosity rather than fear, everything shifts. It's also really important to connect with nature in order to reconnect with your own nature. I live up in the mountains right now. I am loving it. We are at the tail end of the winter, and the little bitty buds are coming on the trees of leaves and flowers everywhere. And I am just reminded constantly of the nature of life, that it is always in fluctuation. It is always changing. The only constant is change. But yet there's these beautiful things that are also reminders that there's stability and there's groundedness. I can always count on the sun to come up, and I can always count on that beautiful black sky full of stars. Another thing that's under the umbrella of acceptance is to really make a decision about what you can control and what you can't. 99% of life is out of our control. I really encourage you from time to time to just take stock of that. If you really want to see how much you're carrying around, the weight of what you're carrying around, whether it's a war in Ukraine or what your boss said to you last week, just write it out on a piece of paper. Is this in my control? And then go over to the other side and say, what is in my control? Because your response is the 1% you will always get. That's yours. And all the rest needs to just go. Who needs to carry around that weight? Another thing I really like to talk about is values. I always work with my clients in the beginning of a coaching package or session, and I always say to them, let's connect to who you are underneath all of these experiences. It's really important that you get to know your core values because they are anchors in times of trouble, in a turbulent storm. One of the reasons I use them as a coach is I support people through change, and that's not easy. We do have those fears that come up, and we do have those things that really stop us or block us. So it's really important that we keep reconnecting to those core beliefs, and they will give you answers, and they will give you a beautiful path forward. One of the biggest combatants to depression is to be able to go outside and connect to something larger than yourself, like the stars, or if it's an organization that's outside of the healthcare field, maybe homelessness or foster children. Sometimes volunteering for that will just give you a renewed sense of purpose, that there's something much bigger happening to our human family, and even just the fact that we're here in this very mysterious universe that we're in will really kind of reconnect us and ground us. So it's a very important thing to do as an exercise from time to time. Visualizing yourself at peace is a very huge one, but visualizing anything that you really want to bring into your experience. So just closing your eyes and imagining a time in the past even that you have felt at peace or felt passionate or felt a sense of purpose. Just noticing kind of what may have shown up in that time, how you felt, noticing what shows up in your body, just remembering that time. And then kind of shoot forward and imagine that. Imagine yourself being there again. Again, when you're in a really difficult moment, it's hard sometimes to see yourself that way, but just knowing that it's possible, that is a better use for your mind, a way to redirect your mind rather than these anxious thoughts. And one of the most important things that I believe as a coach is that you are like the sun behind these clouds. These clouds meaning your experiences. That's all they are. They're just clouds passing by, and they will pass. But that sun is always shining. It's always bright, resourceful, and full of energy. So your job is to do anything you can to plug back into that resourcefulness. In closing today, I'd like to leave you with a poem. It's written by Ellen Bass, and it's called The Hope. To love life, to love it even when you have no stomach for it, and everything you held dear crumbles like burnt paper in your hands. Your throat filled with the silt of it. When grief sits with you, its tropical heat thickening the air, heavy as water, more fit for gills than lungs. When grief weighs you like your own flesh, only more of it, an obesity of grief, you think, how can a body withstand all of this? Then you hold your life like a face between your palms, a plain face, no charming smile, no violet eyes. And you say, yes, I will take you. I will love you again. We all suffer. It's part of our experience. Nobody gets away with not suffering. And we never know what that suffering may lead to. Some of my greatest learning moments have come from my most difficult times, even if I was unable to see it at that time. So there's really nothing to fear. And one day you will find gold as you mine through your traumas and experiences. I think some of the bravest people I know have been through the most suffering. And it is your response, that 1% you get to control, that matters right now. We already know that your response to the suffering of others has been incredible. And you have been heroic in that response. And you are still our heroes. And you're human. And we need you. For now, we need you to be heroes to yourself and your community while there's still time. Thank you so much for today and for allowing me to share. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a beautiful evening.